All right, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you once again for coming along to my next talk, and this time on Shanghai. Now, I know you know where Shanghai is, but just in case you've forgotten temporarily, it's here. And near the mouth of the mighty Yangtze River, which is Asia's longest river, just about where it ends its journey and flows into the East China Sea. The Huangpu River that flows through Shanghai, dividing the city in half, is making it one of the last significant tributaries of the Yangtze River before it heads out into the sea. And I'll just take it back. And it's here, in their infinite wisdom, that they have recently built Shanghai's newest cruise ship terminal. It's about 30 kilometers from downtown anywhere, but don't panic, because I have good news for you later on. The art of Chinese acrobats goes as far back as the Han Dynasty, and I want to tell you how it all began. It seems that during the off-season, Chinese farmers and village craftsmen had a lot of time on their hands with nothing much to do at the end of the farming season. So they decided to find something productive to do in their downtime until the farming season started again. And that's when they decided, for whatever reason, to become acrobats. First, they practiced with everyday items they found around their home, like glassware. Then they progressed on to cups, saucers, plates, dinner plates. When they ran out of broken china, then they progressed into doing tricks with small items of furniture like tables and chairs. And then as they got advanced, they began using much larger pieces of furniture like bed frames and tables. And when they destroyed everything in their homes, I guess, that's when they began improvising and using themselves and using their own bodies to form human walls and pyramids. But today, thousands of years later, Chinese acrobats are absolutely brilliant at what they do. And one of the best places to see them in Chinese acrobats is in Shanghai. I guess you're never too young to start in this profession, but whatever you do, don't try this in your suite. Wait until you get home, just in case. With a population, an estimated population of just over 24 million, Shanghai is one of the most crowded places on the planet, making it China's largest city by population and the second most populous city proper in the world. No matter how you throw the dice, it's going to be more crowded here than you have encountered to date, and than that you are used to at home. Getting around Shanghai can be challenging if you're not steady on your feet, and very challenging if you are in a wheelchair, because it's very compact and it's very crowded. To maneuver the crowds here, you simply need to throw away any sense of political correctness and start pushing and shoving like everybody else. And you'll be amazed at how well that skill comes into you when you're at home trying to get through the checkout counter a little bit quicker, if you can hone your skills in here. So it's not considered rude here. It's normal survival skill. And you'll be amazed, as I say, once you get home, how well this works for me. My mother always knows when I've been in Asia for a while, when we're going through the supermarket, and I'm just elbowing people out of the way. But that's the only way you're going to get around here. In a crowded city like Shanghai, living space is a premium, and unless you are an expatriate on a Disneyland salary, down at the coalface for the locals, living space is fairly cramped. Whole families can share a small apartment, often with the in-laws thrown in for good measure. So it's understandable why everybody seems to spend so much of their time just milling around outside. Eating at street stalls or in small restaurants is very cheap, it's very affordable, and restaurants seem to be full all the time. There doesn't seem to be a set meal time, and this is something you'll see also in Hong Kong. I mean, who wants to be bothered trying to cook in cramped conditions when you can eat out for next to nothing? And this is maybe why instant pot noodles are almost a staple here. They take very little preparation. And here's a translation gone horribly wrong. Probably better if they hadn't translated this one at all, because it looked okay to me until I read the description at the bottom. But the Chinese government encourages its senior citizens to keep fit, and they provide exercise apparatus in the grounds of apartment buildings and also in the parks. And the seniors here, Chinese seniors, take keeping fit very serious. It doesn't have to be high impact, just as long as you're keeping fit one way or another. But there are others who do take it quite seriously. And very seriously in this guy's case. OH&S hasn't really taken on here in China, and there's no safety nets or anything underneath that guy there. But the latest craze amongst Shanghai seniors is a bit bizarre. It's called Spider-Man crawling. And this is the latest craze. Maybe it works well for flexibility. I'm not sure. I'm not sure I could sustain that for too long. Dancing outdoors is another form of keeping fit. You'll see in the parks here it's quite popular. Some do take it very seriously as well. I'm not familiar with this dance at all. But Fuxing Park in Shanghai, and also down in the band, there's places that you might see this very early in the morning. Also one of the most popular forms of exercise here around town is Tai Chi. This was born in this country here. It's supposed to be very good for improving your balance, especially as you get older. And it helps your coordination. It's believed to reduce the amount of falls sustained by seniors if you take up this hobby of Tai Chi. So Fuxing Park in the center of Shanghai is very popular. And if you know the moves, you might be able to bust out your moves here. I'm sure they have no problem with you joining in as well. Perhaps it's their diet that keeps them fit, I don't know. But I have seen guys of all ages pushing around loads that would defy imagination here, possibly more out of necessity than as a personal keep fit regime. Now, amazingly, of these 24 million, 23 million people here, as very few can understand or speak English. And although they certainly don't let that stand in their way when it comes to doing their own translations, and as I keep showing you these pictures. Here's another one. This is actually a mechanic. This was a car mechanic's version of it here. Now, there's a reasonable explanation as to why Chinese students have trouble learning English, and I found this out when I went to Shanghai to teach English. There is no Chinese alphabet as we know it. In Chinese, there are no single letters. They don't have 26 letters like we do that you simply put together. They have these pictograms. There are about 50,000 characters in a Chinese dictionary. There's over 100,000 all up if you include borrowed words that are thrown in there as well. And it's a matter of memorizing every single one of them. It's not like putting a word together like we do. You have to memorize them. An educated Chinese person will have memorized about at least 8,000 characters. And that's the difference between being educated and illiterate. In order to read a local newspaper, you need to have memorized at least 3,000 characters. And this has some way of explaining why Chinese is such a different language, because they memorize everything. Now, when I was teaching English in Shanghai, and we don't, I'm sure in English, certainly in Scotland, we don't memorize every single grammar rule there is. I'm sure if I asked you around the audience, very few of you would be able to tell me why we say it. But in China, it's different. They have to memorize everything, and they try to memorize the English language, every single rule we have, before they open their mouth to speak a word. And this is a stumbling block, because they won't accept that we don't know why we say things. That's just how it is. And this is why they have so many problems in saying it. What they can understand is simply with that just now. They want to know why an anatom, a preposition, a verb, an adverb, and so on. They will never accept that, well, that's just how we say it. If you say it that way, you'll speak well. And I think this has a lot to do with why they have so much problem speaking English. So if you're a tour guide, and I had a tour guide on the bus yesterday, I thought his English was excellent. He had an excellent understanding of it, and he understood humor. So if you have a guide on the bus who can speak English well and understand your humor, whatever, take some time to understand the supreme effort that has gone in to him or her getting to that port, given in mind what they've had to memorize to do it. Okay, although the Opium War was not really fought in Shanghai, and I'm not really going to touch on it, it was the outcome of opium wars that opened up Shanghai to the west as a trading port, thanks to its proximity to the East China Sea and also its access to inland cities along the river. For some time, China had been happily trading with Britain in tea for silver, but when the British East Indian Company started smuggling opium into China, and Adam covered this in his lecture, before China knew it, they were actually trading tea for drugs inadvertently. And the increasing addiction to opium in the opium dens throughout China became so bad, ended up alarming even the emperor himself. He simply wanted the foreigners to cease importing these drugs. They refused, and the Brits simply moved operations to another port. and the emperor responded with a full restriction on all foreign trade. Agreement was eventually reached in the Brits' favour, with them being awarded the cost of their losses of trade as a result, and with China being allowed to having allowed to have direct contact with officials again back in Canton. But both the governments then claimed the agreement was invalid, leading to a bit of a full-scale attack in Canton in 1841. And as you've already mentioned, the treaty for the 5 ports to be opened up to foreigners, one of which was Tianjin, our last port, and the next one, the second one of the 5 ports, was Shanghai, our next port. China got the honour of footing the bill for whatever it was, the cost at the end of that war. And as part of the deal, Hong Kong was ceded to Britain in perpetuity. Now, perpetuity in anybody's book means pretty much forever, and which was a point of contention to us Brits when we had to hand it back a few years ago. But that's a story for my Hong Kong presentation. But slowly but surely, China was losing control of its territories to the west. Now, up to the point of Shanghai being chosen as one of the 5 treaty ports, it had been trading as a fairly insignificant Chinese river port. But once it was open to foreign trading, it never really looked back. And today, Shanghai is the world's biggest fully automated port. A couple of years ago, Shanghai launched its first pilot-free trade zone in China as an initial testing ground for a number of economic and social reforms. The advantage to foreign investors is that commodities entering the free trade zone in Shanghai are not subject to duty or customs clearance. And that FTZ, or the Free Trade Zone, now covers 4 special zones of the financial industrial area of Pudong. The FTZ has allowed for the sale of video game consoles that were banned in China since 2000. Although it was initially reported that it would also allow unrestricted access to the internet, it has subsequently decided not to lift the ban on Facebook and so on. But nevertheless, this zone now has been a bit of a boom for China in general, as well as for Shanghai. Shanghai hosted Expo 210 with the theme of Better City, Better Life. And it was all about cementing Shanghai's new status in the 21st century. Expo 210, the logo, represents 3 people holding hands, symbolizing the family of mankind. It's a play on a Chinese character of Xi, which means the world. Expo 210 recorded the largest number of participating countries ever, and it was the most expensive expo in the history of the world's affairs, which was very good for saving face in China. The focus was all about Shanghai as the next great world city. This was Shanghai's pavilion. This was the USA. This was Canada. Britain, which is a bit scary. I'm not sure what they were thinking with that one. And Australia. Oh, and I forgot my Kiwi friends over there. This was New Zealand. Shanghai is one of the most fascinating cities in the world. And as I said, they don't speak English, but the concept of how the language itself quite fascinates me. The name Shanghai literally means city on the river. This one here means above or on, because you can sort of tell by it's pointing up. This one means river. And here's where the complications of the dictionary kick in. Before you can look for a character in the dictionary, you need to know what its indicator is, and that's what those 3 lines are. And this is my limited knowledge of Chinese. These 3 little lines mean that it's got something to do with water. And the actual word is for river. So Shanghai means the city on the river. It's divided by the Huangpu River, and that's the whole purpose of it. This is Suzhou Creek. Don't worry about that. It's a river, the little river that flows into, but it's not important to the story. The east side of the river is Pudong. Dong means east. And the west side is Puxi, because she means west. Pudong, and that one's pretty easy to pronounce, and that's on the east side of the river. This is Shanghai's financial business district, and the area known as Lujiajiao is where the FTZ zone is that I just mentioned. Up until the 1980s, this was a fairly nondescript area, full of warehouses and factories, but all that changed in 1992 when it was made a special investment zone, and then eventually the FTZ that I just mentioned. Pudong is also home to Shanghai Stock Exchange, and the foreign investors moved in, setting up their head offices. This is where the skyline began changing. Today, Pudong is home to some of the tallest buildings in the world. starting with the 400-meter high Jinmao Tower. This was one of the original tall buildings, this one here, and its name means golden prosperity. Now, it's said that the architect designed this building to look like a biro pen. I get it, I'm just not sure why. But there are 88 floors, or 93 if you count the floors in the spire. The first 50 floors are office spaces. The next 38 are part of the 584-room Grand Hyatt Hotel. This is a view from the top looking down into the reception area. The indoor observation deck on the 88th floor was one of the first high observation decks in Shanghai. It's called Skywalk. Can hold about 1,000 people up here, and I think some of you might be going here on one of the tours. Cloud 9 Bar is up here. It's the world's highest bar. We're in port overnight. Just think of the spectacular views over the rim if you're a cocktail while you're up here, and I think some of you might also be going up for the views at night. If that's all too tame for you, there's another option whilst you're up there. Skywalk attraction has only been open for 2 years. You're not allowed to do this if you have a fear of heights, if you have a cane or are in a wheelchair. Okay. Third, you must have your passport with you for identification purposes. And I hope that doesn't mean when they scrape up what's left of you after you hit the ground. But if you tick all those boxes, then you can take a walk on the wild side on this totally insane glass-bottom skywalk. Next to the Jinmai Tower is Shanghai's second tallest building. It's the World Finance Center, commonly referred to as the bottle opener. For various obvious reasons. It also has a unique-looking observatory or lookout here in the middle. It's about a 180-foot long corridor. It's also called Skywalk, and it's about 500 meters around. Your feet. And then there's the even more insane 121-story Shanghai Tower that's currently the tallest building in Shanghai to date. That might have changed in the last couple of weeks because buildings are going up so fast. It also has one of the world's highest observation decks. If that's the curvature of the Earth, I think you're at the point where you probably need oxygen at this point. But that is the highest tower. I took this picture here. It was taken by two daredevil idiots who climbed out onto the crane with a head cam. They belong to a group, and I forget the name of that group, but they do this around the world. When this building was being built, and this is what they posted on Facebook. You have to admit, the photo is quite spectacular. I'm not sure what they were thinking. The last tower I'm going to mention is the Orient Pearl Tower and the television tower. It was the inaugural landmark on Pudong's side of the river back in 1984. It doesn't have anywhere near the movie star appeal of the other three towers, but it's not without its obligatory observatories up there. It has more than one lookout on different levels here, with the obligatory glass paneled floor. The highest observatory is the space model at the ball at the top. It's about 500 meters high. This is not my kind of thing at all. But at the bottom of the Pearl Tower is the Shanghai Municipal History Museum with the recreation of an old Chinese street, incredibly realistic figures demonstrating chasing the dragon or getting stoned out of your mind on opium. Shanghai's latest attraction is the maglev train, still over on Pudong's side of the river. Maglev being an abbreviation for magnetic levitation, meaning it levitates or floats above the track. It's been described as it gently kisses the tracks as it glides along at incredible speeds. At about 350 kilometers, it reaches that in just 2 minutes, but I've been known to do that myself in my Honda Astra convertible back home. But then it cruises at a maximum normal speed of about 430 kilometers, which is about 268 miles an hour. I don't cruise at that speed, I've got to tell you. But I think some of you are also participating in that. It does the 30-kilometer or 18.5-mile journey from Longyang Station to Pudong Airport in just 7 minutes and 20 seconds. Although it's at peak times, it's been known to be a whopping 50 seconds late. Which is neither here nor there. It's the third commercially operated magnetic levitation train in the world. So that's it for what there is to do on the Pudong side of the river. And now for the other side of the river, which we call the main side because it's the residential side, or it's also the touristy side. This is not pronounced Paxi. Xi in Chinese is pronounced Shi, so this is pronounced Puxi, like Xi'an. And this is the eastern side of the city, more of the residential touristy side, directly opposite Pudong. And it runs along the edge of what's known as the Bund. It was along the muddy embankment of the Bund that the first British companies opened their head offices in 1846. Today, there's dozens of historical buildings lining the Bund from an era when this was the financial area of Shanghai before Pudong took over. The Bund is what you see on all promotional tourist material in Shanghai. There's some spectacular architecture here remaining from those days, like the famous Peace Hotel, although it's a bit of a dinosaur in architecture these days, considering the amazing structures being designed. And I've just thrown this in. This is the hotel. It's recently opened in a disused quarry outside Shanghai, and it's a pretty good use of wasted space. But dinosaur or not, the Peace Hotel, or the Fairmont Peace Hotel as it's now known, is without doubt Shanghai's most iconic hotel. You can't miss it. It has this iconic green spire that's illuminated at night. And this part has a rooftop beer garden, popular with expatriates. Good place to come for a drink in the evening. If you like good jazz, the Peace Hotel has a resident jazz band that's been playing here since the early 1900s, literally, I think, by the look of those guys. They are the oldest jazz band in Shanghai in more ways than one. Their average age is getting up there, but this band is famous. So if you're looking for somewhere to do in the evening, it's along the Bund here. That's the jazz at the Peace Hotel. M on the Bund is probably the second most iconic hotel on the Bund. M has been here for aeons. It's a favourite haunt with the local expatriates here as well, particularly for sundowners up on the Art Deco terrace. I guess the price of the cocktails undoubtedly incorporates a levy for the spectacular view back over Pudong, right at the other side of the river. It's got a very good restaurant up here, gets great raves as well. Now, in the 70s and the 80s, a series of typhoons caused massive floods along the Bund, and that's why they built this ugly levee or retaining wall to stop it happening again. So it kind of separates the Bund from the river. To disguise it, they've covered it with sort of colourful tiles the best they can, and they've planted lots of flower beds. If you hadn't seen it before, it won't matter, but that's what it's there for. The Bund stretches for about 1.5 kilometres, and it's where the locals come to parade in the evening. It's also where the tourists walk up and down in the evening as well. This nondescript, abstract concrete tower right at the end of the Bund is a monument to the people's heroes, and I'll come back to this in just a moment. And somewhere near this sign here, and it could probably even be this one, is a sign pointing to the Bund sightseeing tunnel that runs under the river between Puxi and Pudong. Takes you under the river in these weird little pods or cabins, and for the hefty price of about $8 each way, you can be entertained by a wacky lights effect that I can only describe as migraine-inducing, or Disneyland's Tomorrowland gone horribly wrong. This should be a dead giveaway, this sign here, as to the Disney-esque appearance to this. It's there, I mentioned it to you. It was popular one point in time. I'm not really sure that it's worth your while, but it's there. The Peace Hotel is about halfway along the Bund, and it sits on the corner of the Bund and Nanjing Road, Shanghai's most famous shopping street. Nanjing Road is, that's the Bund down there, where the Peace Hotel is. The purple line, the mauve purple line, is Nanjinglu, and it runs several blocks right up here till it gets to People's Square, and then it just keeps going. Now, as you saw in my previous slide there, Nanjinglu or Nanjing Road is just block after block after block of shops, and the guys in the audience will be very pleased to know that. It's a good place to come and stroll around, especially in the evening, even if you're not intending shopping, because it lights up. When all the neon lights come up in the evening, it's beautiful along here. At the far end of Nanjing Road is the famous People's Square, People's Park. This area used to be a large or a huge race course until the establishment of the People's Republic of China, when things changed. The race course was owned by the wealthy Shanghai Race Club. But during World War II, horse racing and gambling was banned in China, and when it fell into financial difficulties, part of the race course was turned into People's Square, and the southern end of it was turned into People's Park. This iconic clock tower in the back of the slide was the original clubhouse, and this has been turned into Shanghai's art museum, which was recently reopened after massive renovations. It's now called Shanghai History Museum. When it opened in April last year, people were queuing up, locals were queuing up here outside from about 5 o'clock every morning just to get in. The sheer size of this place is mammoth inside. Visitor capacity isn't going to be a problem anytime soon. It's really worth doing as it showcases Shanghai's heritage from the early days right through to modern times. This is one of its most valuable exhibits. It's a wedding sedan chair that took the artists 10 years to build that. One of the 2 lions in here was built in the 1900s for the HSBC Bank on the Band. The northern end of the race course became People's Park. And this is another place that's very popular with locals doing Tai Chi in the morning. There's a section in here called Blind Date Corner. But let's call a spade a spade. It's actually the marriage market corner. And new marriage adverts are posted here each week, and I hope this theory works for him. Maybe writing in China might have helped, but he's back with a different version of it, so I guess the first strategy didn't work. Now, turning up to the marriage market in your pajamas is not exactly a good look. It's a little bit desperate, but it's not unusual to see people walking around Shanghai in their pajamas. They've been doing it forever. The government has recently cracked down on this, and it's trying to get them to stop doing it. Old habits die hard. Maybe the PJs remind them of the Mao Zedong outfits that they used to wear, but it's not unusual. Just be prepared for that one. The Shanghai Museum on People's Square is said to be one of the finest museums in Shanghai. Certainly the way the exhibits are set out inside are quite elegant. It's a real treasure chest of ancient Chinese art, houses over 120,000 pieces of precious relics, bronzes, pottery, paintings, and so on. There's over 5,000 years of history of Chinese civilization in here. This is an ancient coffin, an old wooden coffin. This is the Shanghai Urban Planning Museum. The title's a bit dry, but the building itself is quite amazing, and it's worth visiting just to see the amazing scale model of the future planned expansion of Shanghai, projected up to 2020, and it's actually quite mind-boggling. When Shanghai became one of the treaty ports allowing foreign investors to enter, just like in Tianjin, they all immediately settled themselves into their own small concessions or settlements. There was a few, the French, Italian, UK, American, and the Japanese. The Brits and the Americans joined forces, forming the international settlement or concession, but the French preferred to do their own thing, there's a surprise, remaining separate and eventually becoming the biggest concession. By the 1920s, the French concession was the premier residential area of Shanghai, and it was a place for the foreign nationals to set up home. Anybody who was anybody wanted to live in the French concession. Later, it was also the place for well-to-do Chinese who could afford to get away from the crowded, cramped conditions everywhere else in Shanghai. Remarkably, the French concessions remained largely unscathed during the early decades of communism in China, but in the late 1980s, largely unregulated redevelopment of this area tore apart many of the old neighborhoods, and this beautiful old French club, the building in the gardens, was gutted, and it became the base of the high-rise Okura Garden Hotel. But in all intents and purposes, the French concession has retained its French flavor. Very wide tree-lined boulevards. The main road is Hangshanglu. It's full of trendy shops and cafes and strange to understand street signs. And it's lots of trendy pubs here where the trendy expats hang out. Because of the French influence and everything French always looks beautiful. You know, let's be honest. Shanghai became known as the Paris of the East. 374 Huangpi South Road was the former residence of Mao Zedong. On the 23rd of July 1921, 12 reps of China's communist cells met with him here in this house to form a national party. And this is a scene from a play of a reconstruction of the meeting that day at the moment the police discovered the meeting. And the setting was complete with the original chairs and whatever at the moment just before they all fled. There's a second house of interest in this area called Sun Yat-sen Memorial Residence. Sun Yat-sen lived here with his wife for quite some years. It was the first site of the first National Congress of the Communist Party in China. He was a medical doctor, a writer, philosopher, calligrapher, and revolutionary. He was also the founding father of the nation and his provisional first president of the Republic of China. He plays an instrumental role in the overthrow of the Qing dynasty and the last imperial dynasty of China. The house is open to the public. It has some of his original furniture and personal effects. Shanghai Jewish Refugee Museum is also in the French concession. The museum has documents, photographs, films, and personal items documenting the lives of about 20,000 refugees who settled here, said to be the largest of its kind in Asia today. The old Rachel Synagogue was built by Sir Jacob Elias Sassoon, I think, in 1920 in memory of his wife, Rachel. It's the largest synagogue in the Far East and one of the only two still standing in Shanghai. Hushan Park is popular. It's a popular meeting place with the Jewish community here. Many came as refugees from Germany in World War II, and they settled here in Shanghai. A memorial tablet inscribed in Chinese, English, and Hebrew is dedicated to approximately 2,000 Jewish survivors who immigrated to this area and to the friendship of the Chinese people who made it possible. Still in the French concession is one of the last attractions I'm going to mention. The French concession is called Xintandi. Xin in Chinese means new. Tian means heaven. So it's kind of like the new heavenly place. It's very trendy, Xintandi, which was originally a run-down area of old stone tenements. They were spruced up, redeveloped into a smart shopping area, a restaurant complex. It's a very hip place for Shanghai expat community to meet. Fuxing Park is also, this is the last one, in the former French concession area of Shanghai. This was laid out by the French, obviously in the night when they arrived here. This is a real oasis in the center of Shanghai. It's very popular with locals practicing Tai Chi or busting out their dance moves. So this is somewhere, if you're looking for somewhere different, head along to this park. I think this lake was meant to be more ornamental than functional, but that's right in the center of town itself. Now, if you want to see what old Shanghai might have looked like in its halcyon days, then head for Yuyuan Old City. It's in the perimeter of what was the old walled city of Shanghai. It's quite a big area, but there's a handful of things you can do here. For a start, there's quite a few entrances into this old town, including through this set of ornate gates. Inside the old city, it's fairly large rabbit warren of little streets, temples, restaurants, and shops. Just to give you some perspective, there's that ornate gate. There's what's called a zigzag bridge to the tea house, an antique market, and the city god temple, which is just off the page there. It's very well signposted in here in English and Chinese. You just need to get your bearings a little bit. There's a main square where there's lots of small side streets running off of it. Just wandering around the narrow little side streets is great for photography, and that's a bit crowded. You'll need to implement your newfound skills of pushing and shoving to get through here. It's a good place to buy skewers of these sticky candied fruit. Although I thought I was buying strawberries, they were actually tomatoes done in candy. And wandering down some of these side streets is a good way of getting away from the less frantic and busy area. Great for photography. Right in the middle of everything is the famous Huxington Tea House, sitting in the middle of this ornamental lake. It's just beautiful. It's from every angle you take a picture. It's quite spectacular at night when the neon lights come on here. The only way across is over this zigzag bridge, which at peak times can become a zigzag nightmare. I didn't actually make it into the tea room. I just couldn't get across the bridge. But I was wandering around the rest of this place, and I did find a charming little tea house on its own. It wasn't the full Chinese tea ceremony, but this little lass who told me she'd been studying English, I think that's what she was telling me, in Sydney, did the whole thing with the teapot. And here I am having a cup of tea with an unintelligible Chinese conversation or English conversation with this little girl. If you absolutely must have a coffee, and it pains me to put this up, there is Starbucks in here too. Yuyuan Gardens themselves are through this unassuming entrance. They're not to be missed. They were built in the mid-1500s. The area is considered to be one of the most traditional gardens around. They were built by the Pan family, a wealthy Ming dynasty official, pretty much simply for his own enjoyment. Chinese gardens are a very close second to traditional Japanese gardens. Both the Japanese and the Chinese do gardens like nobody else on the planet. This big rock here, these rocks were supposed to have been carried here from one of the emperor's own private collection of rock gardens. Yuyuan also has the obligatory bazaar or shopping area here. It's a good place to buy typical Chinese souvenirs. You might find a typical Chinese manicure set. Another translation gone horribly wrong. Or you can take a walk in the wild side and try some Chinese herbal remedies down here. Hong Kong is also good if you want to try some these Chinese traditional herbal remedies and whatever. There's a huge pearl market here outside the bazaar, but let's be realistic. This is a street bazaar if you're thinking of buying pearls here. At the far end of the market is an antique market. There's heaps of good stuff in here, not necessarily antique, but then again, it depends on what your definition of antique is. Good place to find copies of Mao Zedong's Little Red Book. The last few attractions I've just mentioned are in the parameter of the old city here, the French Concession, Yuyuan Gardens, and the old city itself. The most famous temples in Shanghai are the Jinan Temple and the Jade Buddha Temple. Jing'an Temple is quite amazing. It's made of a lot of dark teak wood, copper-plated roof tiles, and decorated in gold leaf here and there. In the 1900s, it was Shanghai's wealthiest Buddhist temple, but it was closed during China's Cultural Revolution as wealth of any kind was frowned on, including this temple. It's now back in business again. The locals come here when they need to pray specifically for financial success. Every city has a town god, and Shanghai's town god is just a few blocks to the southwest of Old Shanghai. It's considered to be one of the finest temples of a town god in China. It's a working temple. It's also very popular with visiting Chinese tourists. Typical interior of a Buddhist temple as well. Not unusual that there's a few gold-plated Buddhas in here as well. And I read that if you throw a coin up to these figures and it sticks, your wish is going to come through. Now, if you get arrested for that, please don't quote me. I'm just telling you what I read. But Buddha that everybody comes to see here is a reclining white jade Buddha. It's quite unusual in that it was hand-carved out of white Burmese jade. It's covered in semi-precious stones. It weighs something like 1,000 kilos. I've seen a lot of reclining Buddhas in my time of every possible color, but I have to say this one is probably my favorite, and maybe because it's white jade. Usually they're made out of green or gold. There's always going to be the bad guys in a Buddhist temple, the representation of good and evil. There's no photography in here, and how I got these photographs doesn't really matter at this point. So that's it for downtown Shanghai. Now, what I'm going to tell you about is outside of Shanghai, and this is the best way to do this is on a tour. There are about 4 ancient water towns outside the outskirts of Shanghai. 2 of the best known are Suzhou and Zhujiajiao. And I read on the show excursion list, I don't have anything to do with the tours, but I always read to see where they're going, that both of them are being offered as tours. So in case you're deciding, there's not much difference between them, but in case you're deciding which one you want to go to, I'll start with Zhujiajiao. These water towns are like small time capsules. Zhujiajiao is renowned as being probably one of the best of the 4 ancient water villages around. As you'll see, they're all set on the banks of the canals. Most of the tours in here take a boat trip up the canal. Wandering through these villages is just quite delightful. They're getting modernized a little bit as more and more tourists are becoming into. They're cleaning up the act a little bit more. Sometimes I prefer it when they don't clean it up quite to that extent. But they are absolutely delightful. This is Fangshan Bridge, the 5-span bridge. It's Zhujiajiao's longest bridge. It's the tallest stone bridge. Sounds like it'll be that. This is on a highlight of most of the tours will come through here, but it's unlikely it'll be that clear. When you're there, it'll probably be a little bit more packed when there's a tour bus there or when there's a ship in port. If you're brave enough, you might like to try out some of the local street food here. Looks okay from where I'm standing. I'm quite adventurous when it comes to food. If it looks dodgy, it is. If it doesn't look too dodgy, then I'll have a go at it. The ancient post office here is from the Qing dynasty, in the days when the mail was delivered around here by boat. The post office is the only remnant of its kind in East China. So that's part of this tour, I think. Most tours make a stop there. Tours to Zhujiajiao generally call here, and they generally make a stop at the Chinese Herbal Medicine Center. And this is a traditional herbal medicine center, or a pharmacy, if you like. And you can learn about the history of this ancient herbal cures. If you're interested in trying herbal medicines, you can learn about it here. Hong Kong is also a good place to find these places as well. The second of the popular tours is to water villages to Suzhou. It's, again, one of the ship's tours is coming here as well. Between the tour towns, there's not much difference between the two of them. I think the difference is one of them includes a silk factory at the end of it and lunch, and the other one doesn't. But both towns, they include a boat trip. This one is known as the Venice of the East, although you could apply that to either Sujiazhou or Suzhou itself. They're very similar. They are absolutely beautiful. Boats running up and down the canals here. It's just a photographer's paradise, and it really does look like Venice. And yes, it's a bit touristy, but it doesn't really matter. And so hopefully you'll get a chance to see some of the older parts as well, as well as the touristy parts. As far back as the 3rd century, Suzhou has been the center for both commerce and the silk trade, and a haven for scholars. When these artists and skilled craftsmen eventually retired, the retirees had more time on their hands to tend their gardens around their homes, turning them into classical works of art, and they are absolutely stunning. There's a couple of gardens open, but I think the one that the tour goes to is the Garden of the Nets, the Master of the Nets. This is called that because there was an old fisherman who was the original owner of this, and it was a reference to the fishing nets. It's changed hands a few times, clearly, through the centuries, but it has only been at hands to all along the way. They've added rocks and water features and whatever. It's now in the National Heritage listing. So if you haven't had a chance to see a Japanese traditional garden or a Chinese traditional garden, here's your great opportunity to do it. This is the famous Panmen Gate. It was built in 514 BC, making it about 2,500 years old or thereabouts. It was built as the only entrance into the water village, so it was giving easy protection to protect the whole village from invaders. We're on the home run now. China is famous for silk, so if you get an opportunity, and I think one of these tours does actually visit a silkworm or a silk factory. Clearly, you know they're made by silkworms. They don't do it on their own. They do get some help here to make this finished product. It's quite fascinating to see how they do this. There's a lot of work goes into making silk. I wasn't aware of it until I went to this. There's a whole lot of things going on, including stretching it and whatever. And this is probably why it costs the way it does. And then you can pick up some of the final silk products in here, silk cushion or whatever else it is you need made out of pure silk. Now we're in port overnight, actually for 2 nights, so why not make the best of it? Nanjing Lu is the place to go after dark when the neon lights come on. The only other place that I can equate this to, and we'll see when we're in Hong Kong, is to Nathan Road, if you've ever been to Hong Kong. It just lights up, it becomes magical. There's a number of small river cruises, do night tours along here. You need to check with the tour office on the terminal, just to make sure where and when they leave from. But I understand some of you are going up to the 88th Observatory up here to have a look over Shanghai at night. Views don't really get much better than this, unless you're sitting on the balcony of the Peace Hotel with a cocktail. The few things you need to consider about being ashore here. This is one of the most amazing cities on the planet, and I lived here for 3 years, so I'm fairly comfortable getting around. But even so, you need to have a map because it's frustrating if nobody speaks the language. Just make sure your map is written in Chinese and English. Signs when I first went to Shanghai were written in English only. And I had to memorize half a dozen characters, not 3,000, so I knew where to get off the subway to get home. But since Expo 2010, signs have generally been written in both Chinese and English, especially in tourist areas. Now here's a couple of words. No thank you. If you don't want it in Chinese, it's bu yao. That's all it takes. There's nothing like no thank you very much, but no, it's simply bu yao. I don't think there's a word for please in Chinese. It's straight to the point. You don't want it, bu yao is a good way to do it. Xie xie means thank you, and that's how it's spelled, and that's another word that will come in handy. And here's a word of warning. If you're down on the bund, this is where Chinese students hang out looking for tourists. They want to practice their English, but it's going to be a one-sided conversation because you're not going to have a conversation with them. And when I worked in Shanghai, my aunt and uncle came out, and it really annoyed me because I was teaching English all day long, and then I was walking along the band with them, and I was having to stop and answer questions in Chinese. In English. And my uncle said, Linda, why don't you put a sign around your neck saying, I'm an English teacher, naff off. So my auntie got sucked in this. Just be aware, they will come up and they will tag on. If you don't want it, just say boo yao and they will go away. Small kids will stand and stare at you because we are so big and we've got blonde hair and one thing and another, and they will just laugh at you. But laughing in this culture is not laughing at you. I think it's a nervous reaction. They see us as being so strange that the only response is to laughing. Unfortunately, begging is still prevalent here, especially in tourist areas. Folk comes in from the outskirts of Shanghai to beg. It's always hard for me just to walk past these guys. I don't believe that they have a limousine around the corner. And so I drop a few coins here and there when I can. I'm not sure about these little kids. I think they're part of a bigger network of scam here. Now, if you're not doing any of the ship's tours, the best way of getting around Shanghai, most taxi drivers are not going to speak or understand any English, or Mandarin for that matter. Shanghai taxi drivers seem to speak Shanghainese, which is a language to themselves. You really do need to have a map in English and Chinese so that you can point where you're going to. Since the influx of foreign visitors at Expo 210, increasing numbers of taxis in Shanghai now have GPS. And in theory, you just plug in where you want to go. There's an assumption that you know where you want to go, and there's an assumption that it's going to be some sort of English on here. But it may or may not work. But one word you need to remember is da bi yao. It means turn the meter on. To get it going, they need to put that meter on. Shanghai Metro is massive. It's got 13 lines, making it the longest network in the world, I think. There's another 20 or 30 lines planned for 2020. The names in the MTR stations are in Chinese and English, so that's easy enough. These subways are scrupulously clean, as they are in Hong Kong. You're not allowed to eat or drink in subway stations. You're not allowed to do any of this. Spitting used to be a problem here. They're trying, not with expats, but with Chinese, and they're trying to bring that under control. The subway trains are just as scrupulous. There's absolutely nothing around because no one's eating or drinking in any of them. It gets very crowded here. The traffic in Shanghai is very crowded, and locals will all take the subway because it's the easiest way to get around, but it also gets very crowded, particularly during peak hours, which seems to be the most part of the day. So you just got to do what you got to do if you want to get onto that train, and if you're going to stand back and wait for everybody else, you'll never make it. If you are going on the subway, there's ticket machines. They're in English and Chinese. You can buy a one-day travel pass, which they introduced when they can't remember what it costs, but it's not expensive, and you get to keep it at the end of the trip. There's also a hop-on, hop-off bus runs around Shanghai. It does 4 different lines. It goes to downtown Puxi. The red one goes to Puxi, the blue one goes to Pudong, the green one goes to Lujiajiao, the financial area, and the green one goes to the old city. You need to check this out because I'm not sure how close to the ship it comes or whether I don't think it comes to where we dock, but check it out with the Information Bureau. I know it will stop somewhere on the Bund, I'm just not sure. Crossing the street in Shanghai is akin to taking your life in your hands. Especially down near the Bund, because it's a 10-lane road, 5 lanes going in both directions, and tourists wander around not looking where they're going. Traffic does not stop for tourists or for anybody else for that matter. I was here on a holiday, and this place was just incredible. It's busy at the best of times, but there was masses of people, and they come in from the countryside, and they're perhaps not used to the traffic. They were just stepping out to the traffic in front of it, and they called in the police. And they called them, and they were already there. They had to form a chain to keep everybody on the zebra crossing going across the street there. So only cross the pedestrian crossings. Don't even think about running across the road here. Traffic and people and buses and everything moves like plankton in the sea. Providing you don't do anything dodgy, the driver coming towards you will have calculated the trajectories that you are both moving in so that he doesn't hit you. But if you panic or do something dodgy like running, he's lost all track, and the chances are it's going to be disaster. So if you're walking across here and you see traffic coming towards you, just keep walking at the same speed. He's already calculating the speed you're traveling at. This applies also to Vietnam, which I'll mention to you in a moment, the next one. So here we go. Now remember me telling you at the start that Shanghai built a new cruise terminal which is miles out from anywhere. Well, that's where the majority of cruise ships go, not us, because we are small. And we are going to dock at the old but the renovated cruise ship terminal somewhere here, and the Bund is over here. So we are pretty much in the center of town. And this is where I always used to dock until they built the new one, and it is so complicated to get anywhere from. Now, I put this up here. You can actually walk from where we dock and the timing is up. There's about a 20-minute walk to the bund, which is down here. Now, this is not a flat road. It's rugged. When you come out of the cruise ship terminal, you come up the back here, you walk across this bridge, and that's that Tower I showed you that was the monument to the heroes at the end of the band. This is a rugged road. It's uneven, it's narrow, it's easy to walk on if you don't have problems. If you have a wheelchair, canes, your best idea is to get a taxi or something into town. I don't know who's going to be standing at the terminal, but from any port we've come to so far, there's locals down there offering. Just be aware. You walk across this bridge, there's that monument I mentioned, and where that other one is, that's where the Peace Hotel is and the start of Nanjing Lu. Once you get to this section across the bridge, it's pretty flat walking, but it is a bit rugged on the other one. So whatever you decide to do, make sure you get your timings right and that you don't miss the ship, otherwise we'll see you in Vietnam. So whatever it is you decide to do in Shanghai, have a wonderful day. Thank you so much for coming along, and good afternoon.